beloved of God. Reason number 4. A rabbinic passage reads as follows, according to a standard Hasidic reading. There are other readings, translations of it, but here's what it says. And God said to Abraham, go from your country. Genesis 12:1. Rabbi Isaac said, is like a person who is wandering from place to place and saw a mansion, or it could be a town, a city, on fire. He said, can it be the mansion has no master? So the master of the mansion then peeked out on him. Remember the king in our story looking out and said to him, I am the master of the mansion. Similarly, Abraham said, can the world not have a master? So the Holy One, blessed be he, looked out on him and said, I am the master of the world. Whereas other Hasidim take Abraham to have discovered a God who cares for the world, in Reb Nachman's story, I suggest, when God peeks out at Abraham, the stress is on Abraham learning of God's utter otherness to the world burning with the fires of human finitude, the fires of corruption, lying, and evil. Note that in the rabbinic parable, God looks out on Abraham. God looked out on him, not at him. This matches the story that we have, where the king looks out to see who it is that has discovered the truth about the king. So the king looks out on Abraham, on the wise man. Now there are 2 additional elements of the story that point to Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac. Here goes. Reason number 5. The wise man, I am assuming, was sent to the holy temple, together with what we saw before about the holy temple. Now when God commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, God sent him to the land of Moriah. In Jewish tradition, Moriah is identified with Mount Moriah, the future location of the temple. Jewish tradition also sees the command to Abraham as the culmination of God's earlier command to him to go to Canaan, as though the ultimate purpose of sending Abraham to Canaan was that he reach this place. Reason number 6 and last. At the end of the episode of the Akedah, went too far. At the end of the episode of the Akedah, we read this as follows. Abraham called the name of that place Adonai Yireh, as it is said to this day in the mount where Adonai Yireh. I looked at the various translations God provides. I don't know how they got those translations. But Adonai Yireh means that God sees, while Adonai Yireh means God is seen or will be seen. Now recall that at the end of Nachman's story, the king both sees the wise man and is seen by him. If the story is about Abraham, then we have here a pointer in the story to the double mutual seeing contained in this verse. God sees and is seen by Abraham. For Reb Nachman, we will shortly see, the Akedah is that moment in history when the comic nature of divine service first became manifest. And once again, Reb Nachman says this can be revealed only to the wise. The near sacrifice of Isaac reverberates down through history as the paradigm of all service of God. A paradigm that has its power because Isaac was Abraham's beloved son. One serves God as though one is serving God. One never really serves God. So finally, we come to the sacrifice of Isaac, a comedy in 2 acts. Okay? What would follow if we assume from these 6 reasons that there are allegorical allusions to Abraham and to the Akedah. And since I promised you 2 acts, we will have 2 acts, but there are more than one scene in each act. So let's start with Act 1, Scene 1. The story begins. It came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here am I. And he said, Take now your son, your only son, who you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell you. Abraham had left his homeland for Canaan, had circumcised himself, and otherwise followed God in righteousness and faithfulness. In all of these, Abraham believed he was coming ever closer to God. For that very reason, Abraham does not truly know God. Now the time has come for Abraham to see God face to face. And so, God commands Abraham to sacrifice, not a fleecy lamb or a bleeding goat, but the most beloved to him of all, his son, his only son, Isaac. The import of that can be seen in the words of Maimonides. In this story, Abraham was ordered to do something that bears no comparison. In truth, it is the most extraordinary thing that could happen in the world. Such a thing that one would not imagine that human nature was capable of. Here is a sterile man having an exceeding desire for a son and having the wish that his progeny should become a religious community. When a son comes to him after his having lost hope, how great will be his attachment to him and love for him. Because of his fear of God, because of his love to carry out his command, he holds this beloved son as little, gives up all his hopes regarding him, and hastens to slaughter him after a journey of days. Abraham goes to the place. And Abraham arose early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he cleaved the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. As Abraham travels to Mount Moriah with his son in hand, excited thoughts run through his head. I am on my way to perform the greatest act anybody could possibly do for God, sacrificing my son, Isaac. I am about to carry out the supreme act of reconciliation with God, giving up that which is most dear to me for God's sake. I will be God's beloved. I will be God's single one. I will be God's knight of faith. Abraham proceeds to the sacrifice, and Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Abraham arrives at the glorious moment. He binds Isaac with supreme seriousness and raises the knife for the greater glory of God. Abraham's heart pounds with awareness of the remarkable significance of this act. And we go to scene 2. The angel calls out. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not your hand upon the lad, neither do anything to him. Just then an angel calls out, Abraham, Abraham, stop. Don't lower the knife to his throat. At this moment, Abraham is meant to comprehend that even the most heroic sacrifice to the sublime infinite is, as Reb Nachman put it, all just a joke compared to his greatness. The angels in heaven are bursting out in laughter. Alas, Abraham doesn't get it. Here's a rabbinic midrash reporting a conversation between the angel and Abraham. The angel said, do not bring the knife down on the boy. So Abraham said, okay, so I'll choke him. So the angel said, do nothing to him. So Abraham replied, it's okay, I'll take a drop of blood. Let me take a drop of blood from him. To which the angel answered, don't do to him anything, meaning don't make him a wound. A play on words between the Hebrew me'uma and mum, one meaning anything and one meaning a wound. Abraham fails to understand. Abraham is stunned. Then the angel declares Abraham to be a God-fearing man. The angel proclaims, Abraham, you just don't get it. You are indeed a fear of God because you did not hold back your son. Fears of God, as Hegel has told us, are those who mistakenly think they can serve the sublime infinite with their actions. Abraham, the would-be sacrificer of Isaac, has proved himself a supreme fear of God because he believes that sacrificing his son would be the ultimate service of God. Hearing this ironic remark, Abraham is confounded. Why was the sacrifice not allowed to go forward to its completion? Okay, now we have an intermission, 15-minute intermission. Then Act 2. Then Scene 1 of Act 2. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in place of his son. As Act 2 opens, Abraham lifts up his eyes and begins to realize, lifting up his eyes, signifying that God is unapproachable, inaccessible. Abraham's picture of God is an empty portrait. Having come to this understanding, Abraham now proceeds to, so to speak, return the empty portrait to God. How does Abraham return the empty portrait to God? God has sent him this far to see the empty portrait. In his very next act, after seeing God face to face, Abraham sacrifices a ram, doing so in place of his son. The ram effectively replaces his son. Thus does Abraham declare that sacrificing a ram is as good as sacrificing Isaac would have been. So Abraham sacrifices the ram in the comic spirit, acknowledging God's unfathomable infinity. Abraham returns the portrait of God to God by continuing to serve God, although now in the comic spirit.